Alright, hey guys, welcome back to another Unreal Engine 4 blueprint tutorial. In this one we're back for a second part on our door blueprint that we started off in the last video. If you haven't already, the link in the description will bring you to the first part. I also put a link in the video right now, so you can watch the first part where we made a door blueprint open and close, both with a widget interaction and key press, as well as just walking up to it and having it open and close. And as a reminder, we're using the first-person shooter template in Unreal Engine 4.15.1. And just as another reminder, we'll just play really quick. We have the door open and close, and it goes in both directions. And we also have the interacted boolean. So now if we walk up to it, it'll ask us press E to open door. We press that, the UI goes away. And we also have it where you can just have the UI leave if you walk out of the volume, and then it works in both directions. So now we're going to get that to work in multiplayer. And just as a warning, I'm decently good with scripting for multiplayer. I'm still get sometimes confused about multicasting and server-side events and client-side events and things like that. But I'll do my best to explain to you as best as I understand on how to get this to work. So the first thing we want to do is in our blueprint for the door itself, you want to go ahead and check replicates, because we want to make sure that this replicates. We also want to go to our timeline and just set to replicated for the animation. And those are the two main parts right now. And what we're going to do first is get the normal non-interaction functionality to work in multiplayer. So let's just make sure interact is false. And the reason why we're going to do this first is because adding UI to the screen is a little more tricky as compared to just walking up and having the collision recognize you're a player and open based off direction. So let's go ahead now. What we're going to do is we're going to create a variable. The variable is going to be an array of players. I already have it created. I just created a duplicate of my player variable, made it an array. And this is going to keep track of all the players in the volume. So we're going to call add to that array, and we're going to add our player. And then we're going to connect that back up to interact. And what we're going to do between the interact boolean check and our door open is we're going to call switch has authority. Because we really want this to be a server event that then replicates over the server to all the clients. So we're going to check if the player has authority, and then we're going to call door open. But we need to do something special with that door open event. What we need to do is at the top right here, we have something that says replicates. So it's right now it's not replicated, but we want to do a multicast and make it reliable. And then it does everything like normal. The one thing that did change in between videos here, I forgot to change it back, but is the direction float variable. We're going to make sure that's replicated too. We just want to make sure that that value is replicated. It may not be necessary, so let's first see if this works without it being replicated. And if you don't know how to play multiplayer within the editor, this drop-down menu here has a section for multiplayer options. Number of players, I think it goes up to like 120, no, 64. We're going to set that to 2. And run dedicated server. If that's true, that means that a dedicated server is going to be spawned by itself. It's not going to be playing the game, but then the 2 or whatever number of players, those are going to be connected clients. Whereas if this is false, one of those connected clients is actually going to be the server as well. So we're going to just do it without running a dedicated server. It'll work in both cases, or it should. We'll double check that. But let's go ahead and play. Now I have my client player here, and my server here. So let's go to the client. In the client, it opens and it closes, and both players see it. Let's try with the server now, and closes. Now let's try both directions here. Let's see, move our servers. He sees that. Yes, and everything's working perfect. So just as a recap, again, this is the easier part. First we made our door actor blueprint, made sure it replicates. We then made sure that our door animation is replicated. And then we keep track of all the players in the volume. That's going to be important in a little bit. But it's basically so that we don't want the door, say that both players are in the collision, right? And the door is open, for this case at least, then if one of the player leaves, but the other player stays, we still want the door to stay open. So I'm going to show you how to do that in just a second. But that's why we're keeping track of the array right here and adding to it. And then we use switch as authority because we want this to be a server event. So only the server can call this, but when it does happen, it multicasts to this here. So now let's go ahead and do the event. End overlap for this door collision. So what we're going to do is separate this part from reverse. We're going to grab our player's array. We're going to call remove and remove item. And then we're going to do a check. And this check is basically to say, hey, is the length equal to 0? And if it is equal to 0, that's when we want to reverse the door. Because, like I just said, if one player is still in that volume, we don't want the door to close on them, really. We want it to stay open. So here's our server. Let's have him go to the door. Let's also move our client there. So now if the player goes to the door, now he's definitely out of the volume, but the door stays open on this client. Now if the client leaves, now the door closes. So that's the exact functionality that we want. So just a recap of what we just did. On end overlap, we remove the player that has ended overlap from our array. Then we check to see if the array length is equal to 0, and if it is, reverse. So that's it. So now it's time. It's not too terribly difficult, but figuring it out for the first time was pretty difficult. What we're going to do now is the interact, where you have to press E. So let's check interact again. Let's go back into our door, and the first thing we need to do is change how we're adding UI to our screen. Because what we need to do is check if the controller is valid, then we need to check if it's a local controller. And if it is, then we add it. So we just got to change just a little bit of this. So instead of the player valid check, let's make it the controller valid. So we're going to check, hey, is our controller valid? Okay, if it is, great. Then from our controller, we're going to get is local player controller. And it's a Boolean, so we're going to do a branch. And then if that's true, we're going to do everything else just the same. So let's see if that enough here works. So we have our server, we go to the door, it says press E to open door, and then it leaves. Let's try it with the client. Press E to open door, that works. Do both, that works. But now, right now, as you can see, when we leave, we don't get the UI to go away. And that's because of that check we just made for the other option. Because we check to see, hey, is the length equal to 0? If it's true, then we do the whole reverse, and then we do the whole UI removal. And that's not what we want to do at this point. So what we need to do first is let's create a new function, because in order to remove the UI correctly, we got to make sure we remove it from the right player. So let's just create a new function, and we'll call it remove open door UI. It'll need a player input. And we're going to do a lot of the same things that we do to add the open door. In particular, this section. This right here, this set of logic, basically tells us if it's a local player and whether it's the right client or not. So we just copy that and connect player into get controller. And then what we can do here is grab this logic here, where we remove from parent, and when we nullify our UI variable, and that's pretty much it. That's our function. So again, we get the player's controller, check if it's valid, check if it's a local player. If it is, we then check if our UI is valid. If it is, we remove it from the screen, and we nullify our interact UI variable. So now we can go back into our graph, and we can do a couple things. First, let's remove this. And we also don't need this binding anymore. I'll explain in a little bit. Let's just delete that for right now. So basically, what we want to do is, after we remove the player, that's when we want to call remove open door UI. So now this will happen anytime. So just to clean this up a little bit, let's just connect this instead, move this over, and connect the player variable here. And that should be it. So now, you both can enter. Now, as you can see, I went in, the UI shows, I left, the UI's gone, and this is the client, and the whole time this UI stayed on the server. And it'll work the same way for the client. So if the client stays and the server leaves, you can see now it works there too. Now pressing E, it doesn't do anything because we removed some of that logic. And we're going to do a couple things. First thing, we don't need the interacted call anymore from our UI. So that's done. So now our UI is totally good. In our new door, we took out all of this that we were calling before, and we actually don't need to return our UI any longer. Now we're just going to get an error because we need to just refresh this function. And then we can just recompile. Now that's done. And now the rest of the work is going to be in the first person character. And I have a lot of it saved over here, so I'm just going to bring it back in. And so we have a duplicate here for this call we don't need. So pressed is going to go in here, and we'll just move the rest up. So what we have going on here, we created a server event in our character. So when we press E, it calls a server event in the character. The server then calls the door open, the one that's multicasted in our new door, and then it calls the rest of that logic. So we're going to need to change a little bit because this is some old logic with my original setup. So what we're going to do is create a, let's just remove this, create a new variable, we'll call it new door, just because the original is the original door. Change its variable type to the new door BP. File save, and make this a public variable because we're going to have to set this variable in the door. So new door, and then from that we call door open. And then we're going to pass through self as the player because we're in the player character. And that's all we have to do in the character. So again, we press E, it calls a server event in the character. That server event then calls the multicast event inside the door that tells it to open. And then also at the same time we're calling interacted so that in our UI we still remove it from the parent. So the last thing we need to do is in our door, we basically need to assign that door value. So all that really takes is to get the player reference variable. It's called set new door. And then what we're passing through for new door is a reference to self, because self here in this case is our new door. And that is it. We're going to need to add a couple, one last thing, but that's more for polish. But right now, as this stands, this should work. So let's save, let's jump in. Hopefully you can see both. Let me just move this up a little bit. So now I'm controlling the client, press E, door opens. And you can walk out, and it does everything the same. So now the one thing we want to fix, just as an added level of polish, is if I open the door, press E, you'll notice that for the server or the other player, it still says press E to open door. And obviously that's not the case. Like, the door's already open. So we're going to create some logic to make sure that we don't see that actually happen. So what we want to do is we're going to create a new variable called bIsDoorOpen. Make it a Boolean, make it a single variable. And what we're going to do, it's something kind of cool, is under replication, we're going to call something called a rep notify. And what this will do is anytime this variable is changed, it will automatically call a function. And it creates it automatically for you. So as soon as you do rep notify, it'll create a function. The basic format of the function name is just onRep underscore and then the name of that function. So what we're going to do with this is bDoorOpen. We're going to do a branch. If I can plug this in, there we go. So if the door is open, what we're going to do is remove this our widget from all the players. So to do that, we need to get our players array. We're going to do a for each. And for each element, if you remember, this is the key that lets us know if it's the correct player, if it's a client or if it's the server. So we can just copy and paste that logic and take the array element, put it into controller. And if it passes all these checks, we can then check if the interact UI is valid, and if it is, we remove it. So what happens if, in this case, the door open is false? What do we want to do? We basically want to add back that UI, right? So we could do almost the same thing. We could just grab up to this point. So we're grabbing the for each loop and then the check if it's a valid controller. Plug that back in. Then let's copy and paste some of the logic here for when we add the UI to the player in the first place. And just paste. So luckily we can copy and paste a lot of code, which is really nice. And that's it. So just to recap on this, so every time that bIsDoorOpen variable is changed at all, because we're using a rep on notify, you get a function that gets called each time. And then we check that value of that Boolean, and if it's true, if the door is open, we want to remove all of the UI saying press E for the door to open. But if it's false, we want to check to add it back to all the players in the volume. That's why we're using this array. So now, again, we don't need to put this function anywhere. It gets called automatically whenever we change the variable. So what we need to do is change that variable. So what we're going to do is down here where door open, after we play, we're going to call bIsDoorOpen, set it to true. And then what we're going to do then is after reversing it, with the end overlap here, call it again, but set it to false. And then one last place what we need to do, just for cleaning up purposes, is for the door open event, we first want to check if the door is open. because if it is open, why would we want to play the animation again if we press E? So I like to use not booleans because I want the main path of execution to be through the true execution pin. I don't like it whenever the actual main path of execution goes through false. So we're basically asking, hey, is the door not open? If it's true, then we go ahead and open it. Or at least then check if it's playing and everything like that. So now we can compile, we can save, then we can play. Space these guys out. So with the client, put them in, server, put them in, press E to open door. As you can see then, now the door opens and the UI is removed. But let's say, for example, I then leave, go through, door closes, go back in, press E if I wanted to. So there you go. So obviously this thing doesn't have collision, but that's okay. So everything seems to be working. So just to recap this part one last time. Create a boolean for B is door open, set it to rep notify for replication, creates the function for us here on rep notify. For is door open, we check if it's true or not. If it is true, we loop through all the players within our door collision, get its local controller. That all passes, then we check if the interact UI is valid, and if it is, we remove it. But if the door is not open, we then go through all the players in that volume, check if they're valid controllers, create that open door message widget, set its variable, add it to the viewport. And then for is door open, if the door open event, we first check if the door is open. If it is not open, we do the rest of the animation here. We play, and then we tell the notify, hey, door's open, set that to true, please. And then once we leave, we first do all these checks. And what we can actually do, and so say for example, we want the door to close, even if this is, if we don't want, sorry, let me get my words right. So say we have the two players by the door, first player opens the door and then leaves the volume. Say you want the door to then close. So if we don't want this check, if there's no players left in the volume, if we wanted to skip over that, what will happen, we already did a check for this, so let's say the server walks to it, press E to open door, client goes to it, press E to open door, press E, I go through, and then you can see press E to open door is now available for the server. Then he can open the door. So that's something we just checked for with these rep notifies. So really depending on how you want it to function, you can either use this check or not if there are any players left in that door collision. And then that's pretty much how everything works for this. I guess to quickly recap everything. The blueprint itself needs to be set to replicates. That needs to be true. The timeline animation needs to be set to replicates. If you want to keep track of all players, make sure you have an array variable and add it whenever a character overlaps. And then you want to do a switch has authority for the normal interaction. So if you don't have a press E to interact, you want to check if the player has authority, because that makes it a server called event that then calls a multicasted event for door open, which then takes place over here. If it is interacted, then we need to make sure that the player knows about this door, because then we can add the UI to the screen, and we do this check if it's a valid controller and whether or not it is a local controller. And if it is, that's when we either add or remove the UI. That's the way I found to keep track of individual players when it comes to tracking players and adding UI to the correct screen. Our UI itself, the only thing we changed is we got rid of the event dispatcher. And the reason why we got rid of that event dispatcher is because we're doing the same thing now in the first person character. So when the player interacts, we call a server event in the character that then calls door open based on the new door variable that we assign right here. And then the player also calls call interacted, which is still what's in here for the UI. So this basically just removes the UI when they press it. And then when you exit the door collision, you remove the door UI. So it does that check for local player, checks if the interact UI is valid, and removes it and nullifies the variable for us. And then whether or not you want to check if all players are still in the volume here, you could do that check, or you could just reverse the door and then use this isDoorOpen notify event or notify variable to create this function where you can basically add or remove UI based on whether or not the door is now open. So hopefully this made sense. Multiplayer replication is definitely a confusing topic when you first do it. So hopefully you thought I did a good job explaining it. I'm not sure if I'll put the actual blueprints up for download. Just watch this video a couple times until hopefully it makes sense. I'll make sure to also link some documentation from Unreal about replicating events. One thing I do recommend doing is downloading the content examples that Unreal provides, because it does show you replication in a pretty decent way. So if you like the video, make sure to like this video, leave a comment, let me know what you would want me to do next. If you have any questions, hopefully I can answer them for you. Make sure to subscribe if you aren't already. And until the next video, guys, I'll see you next time.
I just wanna run to you.